Problems. We were only able to air about 35 minutes of this debate between the candidates for Senate in Massachusetts.
Live now to the U.S. Senate as lawmakers are preparing to begin their day. We'll have more work on the Farm Bill. That's expected for the first hour or so, with votes set for 10 a.m. Eastern today. Those votes will be on whether to move the Farm Bill forward. There'll also be a couple of votes on legislation seeking to prevent the doubling of student loan interest rates. We also today do expect the Senate to recess early to allow the body of the late Senator Frank Lautenberg to lie in repose in the Senate chamber. Live now to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
Dr. Barry Black will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. O God, our fortress, our shelter in the time of storm, we look to you for peace in spite of turbulence and trust you to bring us to a desired destination. With your mighty acts, you bless and unshackle us, and we rejoice in the freedom you provide. Strengthen our senators today so that they may speak and act inspired by your Spirit. Lord, enable them to hear your voice and follow your leading. Make them good stewards of their influence as they strive to live exemplary lives. Guide them, O God, until they delight to do your will. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 6, 2013. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable William M. Cowan, a senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent that S-744, as reported by the Judiciary Committee, be star printed with the changes that are at the desk.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to count number 80, S-744.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to counter number 80, S-744, a bill to provide for comprehensive immigration reform and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I have a cloture motion. I ask to be reported.
Clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 80 as 744, a bill to provide for comprehensive immigration reform and for other purposes, signed by 18 senators as follows: Reed of Nevada, Leahy, Menendez, Coons, Hirono, Feinstein, Nelson, Cardin, Whitehouse, Franken, Blumenthal, Wyden, Reed of Rhode Island, Murray, Bennett, Harkin, Schumer, Durbin.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum required under Rule 22 be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I now withdraw the motion to proceed.
The motion is withdrawn.
Mr. President, following later remarks, the Senate will resume consideration of the Farm Bill. Filing deadline for secondary amendments to the bill is 9:45 today. At 10, there will be 3 roll call votes. First, a motion to vote cloture on the Farm Bill. Then a cloture vote on the motion to proceed to S-1003, which is the Republican student loan bill. And finally, a cloture vote on the motion to proceed to S-943, which is the Democratic student loan bill. Senator Lautenberg will lie in repose in the Senate chamber this afternoon. Senators will gather at 2:15 p.m. in the Ohio Clock Corridor to go to the floor to pay their respects. Mr. President, I want to just briefly say that I really appreciate, as we all do, the work of the Sergeant at Arms, Terry Gaynor and his whole staff, for making this so very, very pleasant yesterday, at least as pleasant as a funeral can be, and it was really a celebration. Because of the Jewish tradition, this had to all be jammed in very quickly, or not a lot of time, so they were under tremendous pressure. I appreciate the work done by, the work that allowed us to get this done by Secretary Hagel, Ash Carter at the Pentagon. I also appreciate Assistant Secretary of the Senate, Sheila Dwyer, and entire staff of the Secretary's office for doing all the things they did to make this whole situation as pleasant as it has been. I now ask unanimous consent that when the Senate resumes consideration of the Farm Bill this morning, the time until 10 a.m. be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees.
Without objection.
Following that vote on the motion to invoke cloture on S-953, the time until 11:45 be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees, with senators be permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. Further, that I be recognized at 11:45 today.
Without objection.
Mr. President, this afternoon the United States Senate will pay its final respects to a friend and colleague, a respected colleague, and that's an understatement, Frank Lautenberg. Frank will lie in repose in the Senate chamber, where he spent 3 decades of his life. Senator Lautenberg was one of the most effective and productive senators ever to serve in this body, and as we learned yesterday, one of the most humorous. His leadership, as well as his laughter and his kindness, will be missed. Now, Mr. President, I've talked a little bit about the Farm Bill, but in a few minutes we'll consider whether to end debate on the Agriculture Jobs Bill. I commend Chairman Stabenow, Ranking Member Cochran for the excellent work in managing this bill. We were able to get some votes, but we ran into a problem, unable to reach an agreement to consider a finite number of amendments as they've tried to do for several days. I'm optimistic and hopeful, though, that we'll advance this measure and that soon the Farm Bill will pass in a strong bipartisan vote, as it did last year. Unfortunately, last year the House of Representatives failed to even consider the Senate's passed bipartisan Farm Bill. I hope this year Republican leadership will allow the Senate's bipartisan legislation, which will create jobs, cut taxpayer subsidies, and reduce the debt by some $23 billion, to be voted on in the House. America's farms and ranches are the most productive in the world. But to keep America's farms and America's economy strong, Congress must pass a strong farm bill and do it quickly. On one final subject, Mr. President, to ensure this nation's continued economic recovery and our long-term success, it's crucial that America invest in our educated workforce. We need to continue having an educated workforce. In this country, a college education is the surest path to a better life. But higher education has never been more expensive or further out of reach for middle-class families. So it's crucial that Congress act before July 1st to keep student loan rates low for 7 million college students who can't afford to pile on even more debt. Democrats have a common-sense plan to prevent loan rates from doubling for 2 years without adding a single penny to the deficit. We'll consider that legislation, as I've just indicated, later this morning. Republicans' alternative proposal, by contrast, would be worse than doing nothing at all. It would be worse than letting the rates double, which would happen if we do nothing. Their proposal, a Republican proposal, would saddle students with even more debt, about $6,500 more debt than they have today, a serious blow considering Americans already have more than $1 trillion in debt regarding student loans. So keeping college affordable is the best investment we can make in our country. Congress should be removing the obstacles that keep young people from getting an education, not putting more barriers in their way. So I hope my Republican colleagues will work to help us invest in America's future instead of, once again, sticking it to the students.
President.
The Republican leader.
Earlier this week, I came to the floor and asked Senate Democrats to work with us on a permanent student loan reform. This is an issue ripe for bipartisan cooperation. Both the President and Republicans want to prevent rates from going up in July, and the ideas Republicans have put forward on the issue are actually very similar to what the President has already proposed. So this actually should be a slam dunk. Instead, Senate Democrats have put forward a bill that fails the very benchmarks that the President himself set, a bill that's nothing more than a short-term political patch funded by permanent tax hikes, a bill that would cost taxpayers more than $8 billion, yet only save students about $6 a month. Worse still, it's a bill Senate Democrats know will fail. In fact, they actually seem to be indicating they want it to fail. Why would that be? Undoubtedly so they can keep this issue alive for the permanent campaign that never seems to end. Top Senate Democrats have stated themselves that they're not looking for compromise and that they're determined to show, quote, the difference between the two parties on a key issue, end quote, even where there really isn't one. Two of the most senior Democrats said those things. Those are direct quotes. So basically, they're determined to force a partisan fight here, regardless of the cost to students. And the way they've set up this morning's votes, well, it's pretty clear those votes are intentionally designed to fail. So when Senate Democrats get their wish and the bill fails this evening, I hope the President will step in to work with us on a serious, permanent solution. Because, as I said, our ideas for reform are not all that different from his on this issue. And students should not be made to suffer just because some in this town seem to see them as pawns in a political chess match. Look, this isn't a fight young Americans need. Especially, they don't need this fight right now. Young men and women are already having a rough enough go in the Obama economy. Those who make it through college face a highly uncertain future. Once they get out in the real world, as their parents like to call it, they're having a real tough time finding a job. And once Obamacare comes online, experts predict that their health care premiums are set to skyrocket. Young men in their mid-20s to mid-30s could see rate increases of 50% or more, depending upon which study you look at. But here's the thing. Even if premiums end up going up by just a small fraction of that amount, it's still going to create an enormous headache for the next generation. And while the administration's allies promise subsidies, studies indicate that those payments from taxpayers might not make up for the higher costs. Look, many young folks seem to be largely living paycheck to paycheck these days, often because they literally have no other choice. These men and women are just getting by as it is. Do we really expect these Americans to be able to afford to pay even more? Well, apparently Washington Democrats do. Because if young folks don't cough up money for health insurance, they're going to get hit with a penalty tax. So one way or the other, many are going to start paying more. That's just one more reason why Senate Democrats need to get serious about the student loan issue. This summer alone, more than 9 million college students will take out nearly $7,000 worth of loans and about $25,000 in total by the time they earn their degrees. That's a smart investment, but it's also a lot of money. We owe them certainty and stability and permanent reform along the lines Republicans and President Obama have called for, and those two proposals, as I said, are not that far apart, and they would actually accomplish that result. So it's time for Democrats in Washington to put the campaigning aside and work with us to enact just that kind of reform. Now, in another matter, Mr. President, I've said repeatedly and want to say again today The Senate needs to know whether the majority leader intends to uphold the commitment that he has now twice made, and this commitment was that he wouldn't break the rules of the Senate to change the rules. Specifically, both at the beginning of the last Congress and at the beginning of this Congress, he committed to the Senate and to the American people that he would not use what is referred to as the nuclear option. These were very clear commitments. They were not contingent commitments or commitments made with caveats. They were not contingent commitments or commitments made with caveats. So here we have the exact words of the majority leader. Here, at the beginning of the previous Congress, on January 27, 2011, the majority leader said, "I agree that the proper way to change Senate rules is through the procedures established in those rules, and I will oppose any effort in this Congress," and listen to this, Mr. President, my colleagues, or the next, that's the Congress we're in now, to change the Senate's rules other than through the regular order. No contingencies, no caveats, no saying, unless I decide I don't like your behavior. In this Congress, there was an exchange between myself and the majority leader. Here's what I said. This is on January the 24th of 2013, this year. Finally, said I would confirm with the majority leader that the Senate would not consider other resolutions related to any standing order or rules this Congress unless they went through the regular order process. Now, at the beginning of this session, Mr. President, we passed a couple of rules changes, a couple of standing orders. We made some changes, and we made those changes in return for the majority leader's commitment, which followed. That is correct, said the majority leader. Any other resolutions related to Senate procedure would be subject to a regular order process, including consideration by the Rules Committee. In other words, an unequivocal, not contingent commitment, so that everyone knew the rules of the Senate for the entire Congress. No sort of hanging a sword of Damocles over your head and saying, if you don't behave like I want to, I'll break my word. Now the suggestion apparently is you have to behave in a certain way to satisfy me or my word doesn't mean anything. This is a serious matter, Mr. President. We're only one half of 1 year through a 2-year Congress, and the Senate and the American people deserve to know whether the word of the majority leader will be kept. Now, Mr. President, on another matter, today is the 69th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. June the 6th, 1944, 160,000 Allied troops landed along a 50-mile stretch of heavily fortified French coastline in a surprise attack against the forces of Nazi Germany. The cost was exceedingly high. More than 9,000 Allied soldiers were killed or wounded that day. But the Normandy invasion was the beginning to a successful conclusion of the war. I'm also honored to recognize a distinguished group of World War II veterans from my home state of Kentucky who have made the trip to our nation's capital today, appropriately enough on D-Day, to visit the National World War II Memorial on the Mall. This memorial celebrates their service as well as the service of the brave warriors who landed on Normandy Beach and every man and woman in uniform who fought to defend freedom in World War II. This group will include 26 veterans who were able to make the trip to see their memorial thanks to the Honor Flight program. The Bluegrass chapter of Honor Flight has brought over 1,000 veterans, most of them from Kentucky, to Washington, D.C. for this purpose. This program provides transportation, lodging, and food for the veterans. Without Honor Flight, many of these veterans would never be able to visit the Capitol or see the World War II memorial. Like many of my colleagues, I've been privileged to visit with groups of Honor Flight veterans on several occasions before. And I'm pleased to report that I'll be meeting with today's group at the memorial as well. My father served in World War II. He got there after D-Day and after the Battle of the Bulge and was there from March of '45 through to the end of the war when we were pushing the Germans back into their own country. I wish he had lived long enough to have had an opportunity to visit the World War II memorial. I know it would have meant a lot to him, as it does today's surviving veterans. As World War II recedes further into the past, sadly, we're losing more of these living legends. We've just had to say goodbye to our friend, Senator Frank Lautenberg, the last World War II veteran to serve in this body. The passage of time makes it all the more important that we thank those heroes for their service before it's too late. Today is a perfect occasion to do just that. And I look forward to meeting this group of courageous Kentucky veterans from towns such as Owensboro, Hartford, Louisville, Covington, Burkesville, Lexington, Springfield, Mount Washington, and Taylorsville. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-954, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 73, S-954, a bill to reauthorize agricultural programs through 2018.
Under the previous order, the time until 10 a.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees.
Mr. President.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, there are only 3 weeks left until interest rates on new subsidized student loans will double. If we fail to act, the cost of college will increase for millions of students. There are strong proposals on the table that would keep interest rates low while Congress has time to work out a permanent solution, and yet Congress fails to act. Why? Two issues: money and values. First, money. Some have argued that we can't afford to keep interest rates low, but let's be clear. Right now, the federal government is making a profit from our students. Just last month, the Congressional Budget Office calculated that the government will make $51 billion this year off student loans. Think about that. $51 billion. And that's $16 billion higher than the earlier estimate. We have the money to cut interest rates if we're willing to reduce the profits we make from our students. Unfortunately, Republicans see it differently. 2 weeks ago, House Republicans passed a plan that would produce higher profits off the backs of our college students. And here in the Senate, Senator Coburn has introduced a similar bill that makes student loans more profitable, all at the expense of our college students. This is wrong. We should reject Republican plans to make more profits off our students. Now, Senator Coburn talks about how his plan is similar to the low interest rate banks offer through the Federal Reserve, but he's got that wrong. The big banks borrow at less than 1%, but Senator Coburn would charge students an additional 3% on top of the 10-year Treasury rates. His plan would produce billions more in profits for the government, money that comes straight out of the pockets of our struggling students. We have the money to help our students. We just don't need to squeeze them harder. The second issue is values. Our college students already see that the system is rigged against them. They watched Wall Street bankers get bailed out while their parents lost jobs and struggled to hang on to their homes. They see special subsidies for companies that ship jobs overseas and exploit tax loopholes, while the investments in their future, in jobs at home, disappear. And now Senator Coburn plans to squeeze more profits out of our students. He's fine with the government handing out loans to big banks at incredibly low rates, but he wants our students to pay more. That's not who we are. This does not reflect our values. We see students drowning in debt, and we should be there to help. Senator Harkin and Senator Reid have shown great leadership on this issue. They offer a simple solution to prevent interest rates from doubling. Their plan would maintain the current 3.4% interest rate for 2 more years. I've also introduced a short-term plan that would cut interest rates even more by offering the exact same rate that the big banks get through the Federal Reserve discount window. I introduced this 1-year deal because we need immediate relief while we develop a long-term plan. So I rise today in support of Senator Reid and Senator Harkin's proposal to freeze interest rates on subsidized loans for 2 more years. Their proposal prevents the rates from doubling on July 1st, and it also gives us time to develop a plan that aligns with our values and supports our students. You know, this really is about our values. Have we become a people who will support our big banks with nearly free loans while we crush our kids who are trying to get an education? The student loan program makes obscene profits on the backs of our students. This is morally wrong, and we must put a stop to it. You know, our students don't have high-paid lobbyists to look out for their interests, but they do have their voices. Petitions urging Congress to pass a short-term plan for interest rates to prevent them from doubling have already collected more than 1 million signatures. Our students and their families are asking for what is right. They are asking for something we can easily afford. Let's show them that government can work for them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, let me first commend the Senator of Massachusetts, Senator Warren, for her extraordinarily thoughtful discussion of this increasingly important topic of student debt. Her efforts to assist us in extending the current interest rate of 3.4% while we work on a much longer and a much more thoughtful approach to reform, and she will be at the heart of those efforts. July 1st is a little more than 3 weeks away, and unless Congress acts, the interest rate on need-based student loans will double from 3.4% to 6.8%, making college more expensive for more than 7 million across the nation, including more than 42,000 students in my home state of Rhode Island. This will hit low and moderate income families the hardest. Indeed, 60% of dependent subsidized loan borrowers come from families with incomes of less than $60,000, while 80% of independent subsidized loan borrowers come from families with incomes below $40,000. There is no reason to allow this rate to double, and there is no reason to rush to a long-term solution that would actually make the problem worse. There are several long-term proposals on the table with substantial differences. The House passed a bill that, according to an analysis by the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service, would leave students worse off than just letting the rate double. And the President has, in fact, said he would veto this legislation. But let me say, if the House bill went into effect, it would be worse off than doing nothing, which I think is a strong argument to do something other than the House bill. My Republican colleagues in this body have proposed a long-term solution that would expose students to unchecked interest rates in the future, there would be no cap, and have them pay $15.6 billion more in interest payments for deficit reduction. I don't believe that student loan borrowers should pay higher interest to reduce the deficit, nor do I think the federal government should be generating revenue from student loan programs. We should not be profiting on the backs of these students, particularly as student debt explodes. I propose setting interest rates based on the actual cost of providing the loans with a cap to protect students during periods of high interest rates. Any long-term solution for a student loan should leave students better off in the long run. The Republican proposals do not pass this test. According to a recent analysis by the Institute for College Access and Success, the Senate Republican proposal would cost students entering college this fall and graduating in 2017 $2,200 more in interest payments. For freshmen starting in the fall of 2018 and graduating 4 years later, the increased interest payment would balloon to $6,700. Make no mistakes, the savings generated from the Senate Republican proposal mean that students pay more. As I have come to the floor to discuss many times, with student loan debt eclipsing credit card debt and auto loan debt, we should take the time to thoughtfully and comprehensively address student debt and college costs. How we set student loan interest rates is only one part of the solution. We need to address rising college costs as well. If we don't, even with grants and loans, families will be priced out of a college education and out of the middle class. We need to ask more from states and from colleges and universities. And I will be introducing legislation to revitalize the federal-state partnership for higher education and to make sure that colleges and universities have more skin in the game when it comes to student loans. These are big, complex issues, and we should work to develop bipartisan solutions. But that work, that careful work, that thoughtful work, that thorough work will take time, more than the 25 days we have between now and July 1st. Right now, we can and we must take action to reassure students and families that rely on need-based loans to pay for college that the rate will not double on July 1st. And I've worked with Chairman Harkin, Senator Warren, Leader Reid, and many of my colleagues to develop a fully offset 2-year extension of the current student loan interest rate. Instead of charging low and moderate income students more for their loans, the Student Affordability Act will keep rates steady while closing loopholes in the federal tax code. Specifically, the bill will limit the use of tax-deferred retirement accounts as a complicated estate planning tool, close a corporate offshore tax loophole by restricting a term called earnings stripping by expatriated entities, and close an oil and gas industry loophole by treating oil from tar sands the same as other petroleum products. These are sensible measures in and of themselves, but when they'll allow us to stabilize the student interest rate, they take on even more relevance and I think more importance. We should not be collecting additional revenue from students when we cannot or will not eliminate wasteful spending in the tax code. And we should not allow interest rates to double on July 1st. I hope all of my colleagues will support this common-sense 2-year extension that is fair to students and taxpayers, and I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the motion to proceed to S-953, the Student Loan Affordability Act. I will yield the floor, Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, I'm here to say to my colleagues that though we're going to go through a very expedited process of voting on 2 options on student loans, I want to urge my colleagues to take this seriously. This has a huge financial impact on families across this country, and I say families because we're focused on the students. In many cases, it's the parents taking out loans. And the truth is that under one option today, parents are left out. You see, the debate on this floor today is over 2 bills. One offered by my friends in the majority, which would extend a 3.4% interest rate on subsidized Stafford loans. That's 39% of all the student loans taken out. It doesn't speak to the 61% that are still under the 6.8% rate. It's parents, it's students that take out unsubsidized Stafford loans. they're still at 6.8%. But more importantly, you need to look at the financial sustainability of the program. When this was originally enacted in 2006, the campaign rhetoric was, we're going to drastically cut student loans for everybody, until they realized how much it was going to cost. And then they limited it to subsidized Stafford loans. And when the authorization for that runs out, we have this debate about whether we're going to extend the 3.4% student loan rate. We just forget to tell everybody it's for a subsection of everybody that's taking out student loans. So let me suggest to you that the other option today will be to put student loans on a financial firm footing, something that we can certify for the future it's financially sustainable, not just for the students and for their parents, but for the American taxpayer. They should have a voice in this. So what Ranking Member Alexander, and Senator Coburn, and myself had introduced is a comprehensive piece of legislation that ties the rate of student loan borrowing to the rate of the 10-year bond in May of that year. So this past month, we would take the rate of the 10-year bond, which was about 1.79%. You would add 3% to it, and for the next year, the rate for everybody taking out student loans would be 4.79%. Some members of the Senate can add. And for the next 12 months, anybody that took out a student loan would be at 4.79%. Not some at 3.4, not the rest at 6.8. And that 4.79% would be a fixed rate for the life of the loan. It wouldn't go away in 12 months and have to be renegotiated based upon what the will of Congress was in the legislative mandate of what the interest rate was going to be. And every year that somebody went, whether it was a parent, whether it was a non-subsidized Stafford or a subsidized Stafford, whatever that May establishment of the 10-year bond rate was, you would add 3% to it. It would be very predictable. You wouldn't be at the whim of, is Congress going to extend this? Now, let me predict to you. I know what we're going to do. We're going to have two options up today. Neither one of them is going to get 60 votes. It means it's not going to pass. And the day before or 2 days before the expiration of the 3.4% rate, people are going to rush the floor and say, we can't let this happen. Mr. President, we've got an opportunity to fix it on a permanent basis, to say to parents, to say to those that are in the non-subsidized Stafford, and yet to those in the subsidized Stafford, we're putting this on financially sound ground. And we're going to do it in a transparent way that lets you know every May exactly what you can borrow money for your college education could be. And some might conclude, well, if you borrow every year for 4 years, you're going to have different rates. You're right. And the reality is that in this bill, you've got an option at any point that you choose to do it to consolidate those loans at a guaranteed 8.5%. So if it's more attractive to have 4 different packages of loans with lower interest rates, or the blend of them might be higher, you can consolidate them and take a guaranteed rate. Now, I heard my good friend quote the Congressional Research Service. They came out with an analysis of the 2 pieces of legislation last night, and they came to this conclusion, that for the subsidized Stafford loans, the Alexander Burr Coburn proposal was not very different than what my friends on the other side presented. But for everybody else, for the 61%, it saved them $80 a month. Let me say that again. For everybody else that's not in the subsidized Stafford loans, the Congressional Research Office said our bill saves parents and students that are in the non-subsidized student loan program $80 a month. It's almost $1,000 a year. This is real money. This is what Congress should pay attention to. But let me suggest to you this. Congress shouldn't be sitting in Washington deciding with a dartboard, here's what the student loan rate's going to be this year. Should the price of money in the marketplace not have some impact on it? And what we're simply saying is tie it to a very predictable, transparent number. The 10-year cost of borrowing money plus 3%. You see, Mr. President, unlike throughout the 90s and half of 2000s, we don't have private sector competition against the government model. We decided that having financial institutions come in and offer more attractive interest rates or waiving origination fees or the administration fees of a student loan, no, we didn't want that to happen, even though in many cases it saves students money. We said we want to centralize this in the federal government. We want to take over the whole thing. And then the Congress decided, you know what, we want to set the rates. Let me suggest to my colleagues, this is nothing more than a political tool right now. The last person we're trying to look at are the students or their families that actually need loans to send their kids to college. Today's vote is a defining moment. If we take advantage of passing one that structures this to where the rates that we set are out of congressional control and set by the marketplace in a predictable, transparent way, then this is sustainable. If it's not, this will be the subject of every 2 years in campaign rhetoric, where some win and some lose. I didn't come here to pick winners and losers. I came here to give equal opportunity and unlimited opportunity to the next generation and the generation after that. To suggest that only people who qualify for subsidized Stafford loans are the ones that should give favorable treatment to is ludicrous. And what we'd like to do is to provide a predictable mechanism to set rates, but one that doesn't pick winners and losers, one that treats everybody who's in the student loan need category the same. So I see that the ranking member is here, and I'm going to yield to him, but I do want to say to my colleagues, this is not just another 15-minute vote. You shouldn't feel good if you vote for one and vote against another and nothing passes, because we're going to be back here before July 1, and the likelihood is it's going to be presented to us in a way that we're not going to have an option of doing the right thing. They're just going to say, do you want to suffer the political consequences of letting the rates go from 3.4 to 6.8 on 39% of the American people? I would tell you that a parent borrowing money for their children today is just as vulnerable as a student that's qualified and borrows under a subsidized Stafford loan. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
I'd like to congratulate the senator from North Carolina for his proposal. I mean, these two votes we're having today, I would say to the senator, this is like the opening act at the circus. And hopefully the main event will attract some senators who are willing to conduct this in a grown-up way. I mean, we don't really have a disagreement here. I mean, we have a serious issue. We have students graduating all over the country from high school at about this time, and about 70% of them want to go to college, will go to college. And the taxpayers want to encourage that. We spend about $35 billion in Pell Grants to help pay for that. And then 3 out of 4 of those students who go to college will go to public colleges and universities like the University of Michigan or Mississippi or North Carolina, Tennessee, and the taxpayer helps foot the bill for that. And then the taxpayer is going to loan $133 billion this year in student loans to students of all kinds. And what the senator from North Carolina and the senator from Oklahoma have suggested, and I've joined them, is that we take advantage of today's low rates and that we lower rates on all the new loans to something below 5%, fix that rate for those students who get their loans this year, allow them to participate in the income repayment program so when they take a job they won't have to spend too much of their money repaying back the loan. In some cases, it can ultimately be forgiven, and there's a cap on a consolidated loan if they choose to do that, which many do. Now, if we had a real disagreement about that, That would be one thing. But, Mr. President, we don't have a real disagreement. The House of Representatives, which is Republican, as we know, this is a Democratic body, the House of Representatives has passed a bill based on the same idea. The President of the United States, President Obama, has presented a budget to the Senate a few weeks ago based on the same idea. The idea is very simple. Let's take money. We're going to loan $133 billion this year. Let's take the money at exactly what it costs the government to get the money, which today I believe the senator said is about 1.75%, something like that. Let's add 3% to that, all of which goes back to the Department of Education for collections, defaults, administrative. So there's no profit on the students. And let's loan it to the students. And let's fix that rate, we say. If it's 4.75 today, it's 4.75 next year and 4.75 next year for that loan. And if the rates go up, the rates next year will reflect that increase. So it's fair to the students and it's fair to the taxpayers. It's a permanent solution. It's the same idea that the House has already passed. It's the same idea that the President has recommended. Yet our friends on the other side are so intent of playing political games that they want to have 2 votes today. And if I may say so, they should hire somebody to come up with a better idea than they came up with here. This is one of their weakest attempts at a political game I've seen in 10 years. I mean, we've got a permanent solution supported by the President, supported by the House Republicans, all the same idea, and they've come up with a short-term fix for 40% of the loans. They leave 60% hanging high and dry. They raise taxes to do it, and it's unconstitutional for them to do it because it originates a revenue bill in the Senate instead of the House. That's their weak idea. Now, Mr. President, why aren't they following the example of the senator from Michigan, the senator from Mississippi, and working in a bipartisan way to get a result? Why aren't they following the same idea of the senator from California and the senator from Louisiana on the water resources bill and work in a bipartisan way to get a result? Why aren't they following the same idea that the 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats did on the immigration bill and work to get a result? Instead, they have a political stunt at the White House, and they have another political stunt on the Senate floor at a time when students are graduating from high school, looking forward to college, and would like to have a permanent solution by July the 1st, which we can easily do. So, Mr. President, I guess it is inevitable that the opening acts of the circus are going to sometimes be like this, but I regret it. I mean, I didn't really come to the Senate to engage in this kind of thing. I would much rather sit down with my Democratic colleagues, which I believe we can do, and I'd much rather sit down with the White House officials, which I believe we can do, and with the House of Representatives, and spend the next 3 weeks saying, look, we all have the same idea. We have a serious issue here. It affects millions of students, 70% of those graduating from high school. So let's work together, show the country we can do this. It'd be a nice prelude to the immigration debate, wouldn't it? To show that we can not only pass a water resources bill and a farm bill, but that we can also solve the student loan problem on a bipartisan basis and then take up this more difficult immigration question where we have some real differences of opinion and we really need to have a debate. So I'm here really to congratulate the senator from North Carolina and the senator from Oklahoma for their suggestion and to fully support it. I'll conclude by saying that they have 2 aspects to their bill that I believe is preferable to the version of this idea that passed the House and to the version of this idea that was recommended by the President. Remember, it's the same idea, all 3 places, President's budget, House of Representatives, Burr and Coburn. Burr and Coburn would say, let's have a single interest rate. You know, there are 3 types of student loans. It's very confusing, even for those of us who've been around it a long time. So let's just say there's a single student rate. You're coming out of Maryville High School, and what's the cost of money? You're going to say, right now, if you get a loan of any kind, it's going to be 4.75. It's whatever it costs the government to borrow the money plus the 3% that goes to the Department of Education. So I like that proposal. And then the second thing they do that I would suggest is preferable to the House of Representatives is if you get a loan at 4.75 in 2013, it's 4.75 in 2014 and 15 and 16 and 17, doesn't change. The House would have it going up each year. I don't like that idea, and I don't think many students would. But I wish all of our serious issues opened with proposals from the President and the House of Representatives and Senate Republicans that were as close together as this issue is. I mean, if we can't come to an agreement on this issue before July the 1st, based upon those three major centers of influence up here all making the same proposal, then we ought to go back to civics class in the 7th grade. So I don't think we all need to do that. I think we know how to do our jobs. This is the opening act of the circus. It won't take too long. It'll be a little embarrassing that we have to go through it. But after we go through it, maybe we can sit down and a Senate full of grown-ups will say, let's take the President's idea and the House idea and the idea suggested by Senators Burr and Coburn. Let's put it together. Let's congratulate all those students who are coming from college. Let's encourage them, hope it's a ticket to the middle class, and show that our country supports those students as they seek to advance their higher education. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
The senator from Michigan would allow me to ask consent to place into the record following my remarks an op-ed from the New York Times yesterday written by Senator Coburn, Senator Burr, and me. Thank you.
Without
objection. I thank the Senator from Michigan.
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I have 8 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and the minority leaders, and I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to, that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Then I would ask unanimous consent that there be 2 minutes equally divided between the votes scheduled for 10 a.m. and that all after the first vote be 10-minute votes.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, as we come to our vote now on the cloture on the bill for what we have dubbed the Farm Bill, the Agricultural Reform, Food and Jobs Act, I first want to thank my ranking member, the distinguished senator from Mississippi, for a wonderful working relationship as we have moved to this point. He and his staff have been working diligently, as has my staff. I'm very proud of all of our staff who I think are terrific and have done a wonderful job to get us to this point. I want to remind my colleagues that the vote we're about to take affects 16 million jobs. I've said that so many times, but it's important to say again, I don't think there'll be a single bill on this floor that affects more jobs for Americans than the one that we are about to vote on. 16 million jobs in America. That's how many people depend on agriculture and the food industries for their jobs. They're watching us today, and they're hoping that once again this body on a bipartisan basis does the right thing and provides the leadership to move this bill forward. This particular bill includes 38 amendments that were passed on the floor during our debate last year as we considered 73 amendments just a few months ago, and another 14 amendments that we added to the bill this year. And so I appreciate the input that colleagues have had to make this a strong farm bill with major reforms and real deficit reduction. This is an opportunity to cut spending by more than $24 billion. We in agriculture have done more than any other part of the federal budget to not only meet what are the across-the-board sequester numbers, but provide deficit reduction that is 4 times more than that, while streamlining and providing effective policy for agriculture, conservation, nutrition, and the other parts of this bill. So we're not only standing with 16 million people whose jobs depend on agriculture, we're doing it in a responsible way that cuts the deficit. We're eliminating direct payments, moving toward a market-based risk management system for our farmers. We're strengthening conservation to protect our soil and water resources for generations to come. With a streamlined conservation title and a new historic agreement between conservation and farm groups. We're focusing on beginning farmers to get more people into farming. We all have a stake in making sure that that happens. We're helping our veterans coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan to get started in agriculture as well. And I'm very proud of this portion of the bill that will reach out to those coming home, most from small communities around our country, to help them be able to get started in farming and keep us with the most affordable, most abundant, and safest food supply in the world. Agriculture is truly one of the brightest spots of our economy. It's one of the few areas where we actually have a trade surplus. And the policies in this legislation are a big part of that. That's why more than 100 groups representing agriculture, conservation, nutrition, and every part of the economy represented by this bill have called on the Senate this morning to vote yes on cloture. And I would ask unanimous consent that the full text of the letter that we have received would be in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask colleagues once again to come together and vote yes on the 16 million jobs that agriculture and the food industry support. I would ask colleagues to vote yes on major reforms. We've eliminated over 100 authorizations and programs that were duplicative, didn't work anymore, were not the right thing to do from a taxpayer standpoint. We have consolidated in a way that has not been done, I would argue, for decades in this area of policy. And we have reduced the deficit by more than the last bill, $24 billion. And I would ask colleagues to come together to keep this bill moving and to keep agriculture growing, our economy, and creating jobs. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Mississippi.
Mr. President, I'm pleased to join the distinguished senator from Michigan in urging the Senate to approve this compromise bill that's been developed by the Committee on Agriculture and is now before the Senate for a final vote. We need to pass this bill. It provides a framework to help farmers and ranchers in all regions of the country manage their risks more effectively. It consolidates 23 conservation programs into 13. It contains improvements to nutrition programs, and it addresses fraud and abuse. It also reduces the cost of its programs by $24 billion. This bill reflects a real sense of fiscal responsibility, but still provides a strong safety net for producers. I want to thank and congratulate the distinguished senator from Michigan, the chair of our committee, for her hard work and her strong leadership. She's managed the legislation with skill and a commitment to meet the needs of agriculture producers as well as American consumers. I urge the Senate to approve the motion to invoke cloture.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
How much time before the vote begins?
There are 2 minutes remaining.
Mr. President, during that 2 minutes, I'd like to say that on behalf of several senators, several Republican senators, including Senator Burr, Isaacson, Kirk, Roberts, and others, I'm introducing today the Every Child Ready for College or Career Act, a bill that would let states decide whether schools and teachers are succeeding or failing. It would end the accumulation of federal mandates that have piled up on state and local school districts that have created, in effect, a national school board. And it would help 50 million children in public schools learn what they need to know and be able to do by restoring responsibility to states and communities and giving teachers and parents more freedom, flexibility, and choices. I'll have more to say about this on Monday in a floor speech, but I wanted to call it to the attention of our colleagues. While it's being offered by Republican senators, we don't see it as a Republican bill. We see it as a piece of legislation that will attract the support of classroom teachers, of principals, of governors, of legislators who've been working for 30 years to set higher standards, create better tests, and create accountability systems and pioneering and teacher evaluation systems. We believe it's the job of the federal government to create a national environment for better schools, not to issue orders from Washington, and that the combination of No Child Left Behind mandates, Race to the Top mandates, and mandates as a result of the Secretary of Education's waivers have created such congestion in the U.S. Department of Education that it has become, in effect, a national school board. We want to head the other direction. We want to give back to states and local governments the responsibility for deciding whether schools and teachers are succeeding or failing. So I hope all of our colleagues will read the Every Child Ready for College or Career Act. Senator Harkin and I will look forward to the markup on next Tuesday in our Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. We'll have competing versions. His version is more than 1,100 pages. Ours is 220 pages. That's a symbol of the difference in our approach, and it'll begin a debate which I hope goes through the committee, moves to the Senate floor, combines with the House, and produces a result in a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act this year. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on S-954, a bill to reauthorize agricultural programs through 2018, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that the debate on S-954, an original bill to reauthorize agricultural programs through 2018,